Thank you for watching. I'm Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all news sources and my team. Following news have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Asian, African, and Australian channels, and also by news agencies AFP, AP, and Reuters. Now the headlines. Department of Justice and Google are face to face regarding how we can use internet. Trump hush money trial continues in New York. Today is a World Press Freedom Day and journalists are at risk. Higher interest rate and job growth in America. Texas Democrat congressman and his wife bribery charges. In Canada, 3 people were arrested on charge of killing Sikh leader. Protests in colleges campuses against Gaza war are quite down. Israel attacked Rafah, killing 7 people yesterday. 2 rocket launches, one in China and one in Australia. Flood in Houston, Texas. ISIS threat in Syria increasing. On Wall Street, all Nasdaq, S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial all went up. Now the news in detail.
Today, forensic teams arrive at the remote site in Mexico where 3 bodies have been found in a search for 2 missing Australian brothers. Queensland police investigate after State MP Brittany Lorger reports being drugged and sexually assaulted. A man is charged after allegedly threatening people with a knife, causing panic in a Melbourne shopping centre. And the legal fight that could reshape the app market, how Australia has become the latest battleground against Apple and Google. Hello and welcome to ABC News, I'm Ruby Cornish. Mexican authorities have found 3 bodies in an area where police have been searching for 2 missing Australian brothers and their American travel companion. Perth brothers Jack and Callum Robinson and their friends Jack Carter Road were on a surfing and camping trip in northern Mexico when they failed to arrive at their accommodation. Forensic teams have just arrived at the remote site near where the men went missing. North American correspondent Carrington Clark reports from Rosarito.
We do know through a local official here in the local area that 3 bodies have been discovered. They have not been identified, and that's a very important point, but they were found in an area close to where a lot of police attention was following the disappearance of these 2 Australian brothers from Perth, Jake and Callum Robinson, who were travelling on a surf trip here in Baja, California with one of their American friends, Carter Road. Now, we know that the 3 bodies were discovered earlier today. It's Friday here in Mexico, and they were discovered by search and rescue teams, but we are waiting for identification. But it's particularly worrying given the length of time that the brothers now have been missing, the fact that a woman was discovered with a cell phone connected to the 3 gentlemen, and that 3 people have been taken into custody here in Mexico. That happened over the last few days in connection to the disappearance. So we are waiting on confirmation here in Mexico about exactly what has happened, but this is obviously very distressing news for both family and loved one of the Robinson brothers. So the reason we are up here in Rosarito, which is about 100 kilometres north of Ensenada, a little bit less, is because the brothers were documenting what was supposed to be this dream surfing vacation together. And what you really get from their social media posts is how much fun they were having in each other's companies and with close friends. Rosarito is one of those stops. We're talking to locals who particularly remember vividly Calum because he was such a big presence. He was such a tall guy, 6'4", a professional, a very good lacrosse player, and has quite a large substantive presence, as people describe it here. So we've spoken to a local taco shop who remembers the brothers and their friend coming and buying some tacos, a local cafe who remembers them coming in and wanting to exchange some money because they had American big bills with them at that point, and the surf shop who remembers them buying some wax. All remember kind of big personalities, lots of smiles, guys who seem to be having the time of their lives when they encountered them. We've also spoken to some local surfers who think that they did again recognise them in the surf just because they were such distinctive kind of figures. But obviously this is a community that is really grappling with a situation that they describe as unusual, and this is one of the people that we spoke to a little earlier today.
It's not normal here, like disappearing like 3 people like this way and burning his car and all this. And we feel like very sad because, I don't know, like here is good people that like tourists, international people from here, and we don't like the other people think that here is like too dangerous for the people.
Now, although this particular part of Mexico is known for having organised criminal links, we did speak earlier with the State Attorney General, who says that they're still investigating exactly what happened regarding the disappearance of these men. We believe that the parents are travelling to Mexico at the moment, and we know that Mexican authorities are working both with Australian authorities and American authorities, including the FBI, as they continue this investigation.
A Queensland State Labor MP has alleged she was drugged and sexually assaulted in her central Queensland electorate. Alex Brewster reports.
Keppel MP Brittany Lorger alleges the incident happened last weekend in the town of Yeppoon. In a statement posted on social media, Ms. Lauder says she contacted police in the early hours of Sunday morning. She says tests at the hospital confirmed the presence of drugs in her system, which impacted her significantly. She's taking a temporary leave of absence, but she says she takes time to heal. Queensland Premier Stephen Miles says the government is here to support Ms. Lauder in any way it can. Queensland police have confirmed they are investigating an alleged sexual assault. Housing Minister Megan Scanlon says she too stands with Ms. Lauder.
Those are shocking allegations, and I've read Brittany's statement, and it's really difficult reading. I understand that Brittany's going to take a short time to look after herself, and we absolutely support her to do that.
A 30-year-old man's been charged over allegedly threatening to kill people at a shopping centre in Melbourne's northwest. Police allege the man made threats with a knife stolen from a grocery store at Water Gardens shopping centre in Taylors Lakes yesterday afternoon. He's been charged with multiple offences, including threats to kill and intending to commit a serious crime with a dangerous weapon. The Delahaye man will appear before the Melbourne Magistrates Court today. Charges have been laid over the murder of a Sikh separatist leader in Vancouver last year. The assassination set off diplomatic skirmishes between several allies when Canada's Prime Minister pointed the finger at the Indian government. Emily Grimenz has the latest details from our North America Bureau in Washington.
Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a local leader in the Sikh separatist movement in Vancouver, was gunned down outside a Sikh temple in June last year. And a few months later, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stood up in Parliament and said that authorities had linked this murder to Indian government authorities, which New Delhi rejected at the time as being an absurd claim. Now, Canadian police have spent months investigating this murder and today have confirmed they've arrested and charged 3 men with murder and with conspiracy to commit murder. All 3 men are Indian nationals who were non-permanent residents in Canada. All 3 of them were in their 20s. And police have not been sort of willing to speculate about a motive today in announcing these charges, but they did stress that this investigation is still very much alive. Let's hear a little bit of what Canadian police have to say today.
I will underscore that today's announcements are not a complete account of the investigative work currently underway. There are separate and distinct investigations ongoing into these matters, certainly not limited to the involvement of the people arrested today, and these efforts include investigating connections to the Government of India.
Justin Trudeau certainly drew global attention when he made this quite sensational claim in Canadian Parliament, a claim that the Indian government has continued to strongly reject. But it left neutral allies like Australia and the United States in a little bit of a tricky position. Here in the United States, authorities didn't at first seem keen to get drawn in, but a few months later, prosecutors in New York actually revealed that they had charged somebody over another alleged failed assassination plot that targeted another Sikh separatist leader in New York. And in those charging documents, the lawyers alleged that this plot was done at the behest of an Indian government agent. And further, some of the ABC's own reporting on the Sikh separatist movement was blocked from view in India on the platform YouTube at the Indian government's request. And one of our own correspondents, Avani Dias, faced difficulty getting a routine visa extension shortly after, which the Indian government disputes was because of that work. But certainly this is a very sensitive issue for the allies, India, the United States and Australia, who are otherwise in a point in time that they're all seeking stronger ties with each other.
Emily Grimenz there. The Kremlin has warned Britain and France against risking a dangerous escalation of tensions around the Ukraine conflict after both countries reiterated their support of Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron angered Moscow by once again refusing to rule out deploying troops to Ukraine if Kyiv makes a request. Meanwhile, UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron promised $6 billion of annual military aid for Ukraine, adding that London had no objection to its weapons being used inside Russia.
In terms of what the Ukrainians do, in our view, it is their decision about how to use these weapons. They're defending their country. They were illegally invaded by Putin, and they must take those steps. We don't discuss any caveats that we put on those things.
The International Criminal Court's prosecutor's office says all attempts to impede, intimidate or improperly influence its officials must stop immediately. The statement comes after Israeli authorities and some US politicians criticised an ICC investigation into alleged war crimes committed during the Israel-Hamas conflict. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the ICC is attempting to paralyse Israel's ability to defend itself.
Branding Israel's leaders and soldiers as war criminals will pour jet fuel on the fires of anti-Semitism, those fires that are already raging on the campuses of America and across capitals around the world. It will also be the first time that a democratic country fighting for its life according to the rules of war is itself accused of war crimes.
A United Nations agency says a planned Israeli invasion of the city of Rafah in Gaza could become a slaughter and bring humanitarian operations to a halt. Eric Torchek reports from Jerusalem.
The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has warned that a planned Israeli invasion of the border city of Rafah could be a slaughter. It fears that Israel's offensive could disrupt the distribution of food and medical supplies and shut down 50 centres that are delivering aid to acutely malnourished children. It also fears that an invasion could cut off the supply through Egypt, the Egyptian border, because Rafah sits right between Egypt and the rest of the Gaza Strip. It's taken some measures to move supplies further north into the Gaza Strip, but says that these efforts are at best a band-aid. This was not the first time this agency has made these warnings. It said this in February, but it comes after Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said earlier this week that Israel intended to invade Rafah regardless of any ceasefire deal and despite ongoing strident international objections. Israel says there are 4 active Hamas battalions sheltering in Rafah and that it needs to eliminate them. But as I mentioned, the humanitarian agencies fear there'll be grave consequences because there's more than 1 million people sheltering in Rafah, and although there are some plans to allow civilians to leave, they don't believe it will stop a large number of casualties if Israel invades.
That was Eric Tworchek in Jerusalem. The New York judge overseeing Donald Trump's hush money criminal trial has assured the former US president that a gag order preventing him from commenting about witnesses and jurors does not prevent him from testifying in court on his own behalf. Mr. Trump has already been fined $13,000 for making public statements about witnesses, jurors and others connected to the case. The judge warned he could face jail time if he continues to make public comments. Outside court, Mr. Trump said his legal team would try to overturn the gag order. He claims it's unconstitutional.
The gag order stops me from talking about people and responding when they say things about me. We have people saying things about me and I'm not allowed to respond. So this judge has taken away my constitutional right. And as the Republican candidate and somebody that's leading Biden by a lot, I should be able to respond. But this guy's got me with a gag order.
Victoria Police says it's been in discussions with the state government about extending family violence safety notices. Last year, police issued about 11,500 family violence safety notices, which provide 14 days of protection to victim survivors and children while court hearings occur for intervention orders. Discussions have been held with government to prolong the duration of the protection window, which police say would help victim survivors avoid further trauma confronting a perpetrator in court. The parents of Brisbane family violence victim Hannah Clark are calling for more domestic violence prevention and early intervention programs. 31-year-old Hannah Clark and her 3 young children were killed by her estranged husband in February 2020. Hannah's parents, Sue and Lloyd Clark, have since campaigned for tougher action to reduce domestic and family violence and played a pivotal role in advocating for new laws in Queensland criminalising coercive control. They've told ABC Weekend Breakfast more perpetrator intervention strategies are needed.
Firstly, we need a national register for perpetrators and anyone who goes into the DVO because what happens when they move state? This is why we just don't need laws in, like Queensland's taken it on, standalone laws. New South Wales is doing it too, so South Australia. We need all states and territories to get on board. So a national one law would make it a lot easier, wouldn't it? And also perpetrator programs. Once they do get a DVO, they should automatically have to go and do a program. We might find they'll change. They'll change their outlook. We need to empower these men to have, responsible relationships.
I would like, as Lloyd said, once the DVO is taken out, that the perpetrator is made to a perpetrator program. And hopefully that will help them see their ways, see what they're doing wrong. Also, I would like tracking devices on the high-risk perpetrators so that people are aware of where they are. That certainly would have saved Hannah if she knew that he was hiding at the side of the house waiting to ambush her.
A titanic legal battle with the potential to reshape the app market has been quietly raging for months, and it's not even at the halfway point. 15 million Australians, 150,000 app makers, and the creator of gaming juggernaut Fortnite, Epic Games, are suing both Apple and Google. National tech reporter Angela Bois-Pierre explains what's at stake.
Oh yeah, those infinite levels.
James Lockery is living out his childhood fantasy.
I think 11-year-old me would be pretty stoked. We had the name for Chaos Theory when we were about 13 or 14. It was a MSN conversation.
Chaos Theory now employs 24 people. Like every other app maker, it relies on Apple's and Google's app stores to reach billions of potential mobile customers. James is suing the tech giants, and chances are, so are you. A class action that covers 150,000 app makers and 15 million phone users is one of 2 lawsuits against the tech giants being heard together in federal court. The second suit is being brought by Epic Games, the studio behind global blockbuster Fortnite. Google and Apple are accused of running dueling illegal monopolies by banning or sidelining other app stores on their mobile devices, forcing apps to use their inbuilt payment platforms, and charging fees of up to 30% on every purchase.
There's a hint of envy of like, oh, that's a good business model, one that's got 90% margins.
Apple and Google say not only is 15 to 30% standard pricing, but app makers and users are getting excellent value, convenience and safety on the devices where our most sensitive data is stored. So what's at stake? If Epic wins, Apple and Google will be forced to change their rules. That could mean lower fees and fewer app store restrictions. And 15 million Australians might get a few gold coins back. It has the potential to be Australia's largest ever class action.
We estimate that this claim could be, in the high hundreds of millions of dollars.
But for developers like Graham Dawson, the brightest promise isn't a payout. It's change.
The most obvious difference is that there'll be a downward pressure on prices, especially where there's a lot of competition.
Graham's app Sunseeker is a success story, but in the app stores, success is rare.
As a developer, I feel I have no power at all with Apple or Google. I'm just a statistic.
The app stores are often described as walled gardens. Apple and Google offer protection and quality, at a cost. Epic Games is trying to lower those walls, fighting a string of lawsuits like this one all over the world. So far, the results have been mixed.
But the class action lawyers are buoyant about their chances here.
We think that the current legislation in Australia is sufficient to really ground an action for damages.
Big and small players alike are on the edge of their seats.
Eating the popcorn and waiting to see how it pans out.
And watching to see whether big tech's walls crumble.
Iron deficiencies affect up to 35% of female athletes, and that's about 20% more than their male counterparts. Juggling work, family and training commitments means the usual fatigue symptoms often go unnoticed.
Brumbies prop Sally Fusena has the strength to run over her opponents and crash over the try line.
Pick and go for Fusena!
But what fans see is not always a reflection of how she feels.
I could be on the field trying to, get moved around, but there's not enough blood and oxygen flowing in my body for me to perform well.
Sally's a 32-year-old mum with 2 kids who works part-time, then makes a 5-hour round trip from Sydney several times a week to play and train for the Brumbies. Her constant fatigue didn't come as a surprise, but it wasn't until she was pregnant with her first child that a routine blood test showed the cause was more serious.
They did tell me I had really low iron and that if I don't stay on top of it, I would need an iron infusion. And I didn't stay on top of it, so I did have to get an iron infusion. I was like, is that why I'm sleeping all the time? After training sessions, it wasn't normal how I was really tired.
Iron deficiency affects around 1 in 3 female athletes compared to 1 in 10 male athletes. Alana McKay has been studying the issue, including this staggering discrepancy, for 8 years.
We lose iron when we menstruate, so every time we have a period, we have blood loss, which is associated with iron loss.
A lack of iron impairs red blood cell production and therefore an athlete's aerobic capacity and fitness. But Dr. McKay says athletes are often confused about the warning signs.
They're always feeling tired. If they have families at home, they're always tired. If they're training multiple times a week, they're always tired, and they don't always attribute that symptom towards iron deficiency.
It's not just elite athletes who can be affected by low iron stores, as people who exercise frequently are also susceptible.
Exercise has a really big impact on the way our body regulates iron, so it causes some hormonal disruptions that limit the ability for us to absorb iron from the diet for about 6 hours after we exercise.
With normal fatigue symptoms often going unnoticed, she suggests anyone who exercises regularly get screened at least twice a year. Anthea Moody, ABC News, Canberra.
Defending AFL premiers Collingwood have edged out arch rivals Carlton by a thrilling 6 points at the MCG. The Blues jumped out to a 14-point lead at quarter-time as forward Harry Mackay booted 4 majors, but the Pies hit back to lead by 11 at half-time. Magpies' superstar Nick Dacos finished with 32 touches and 2 goals, including the match winner to seal the
2 military personnel in Nigeria are facing a court-martial over an airstrike that killed 85 civilians and left scores injured last December.
Algeria takes Morocco to the Court of Arbitration for Sport over a map on a team jersey, including the disputed territory of Western Sahara.
5 months after admitting to killing 85 civilians in an airstrike, the Nigerian army has brought those it holds accountable to book. The Director of Defense Media Operations announced on Thursday that 2 military personnel were facing a court-martial. An army drone strike accidentally hit Tudunbiri village in northwestern Nigeria on December 3rd last year. Civilians celebrated a Muslim festival at the time. Major General Edward Buba told reporters in Abuja that the victims had been mistaken for terrorists. He added the army initiated disciplinary action against those culpable after an investigation was concluded. The accused are to face a court-martial for acts of omission or commission. Major General Buba did not provide further details. Nigeria's armed forces often rely on airstrikes in their fight against jihadists and so-called bandit militias in the northwest and northeast of the country.
A political dispute that has spilled over into the beautiful game. And all because of this map of Morocco, which includes the disputed territory of Western Sahara. It resulted in the cancellation on Sunday of an African Confederation Cup semi-final match in Algiers between Morocco's Renaissance Berkane and Algeria's defending champions USM Alger. Now the argument over the team jersey will go to a full appeal hearing at the Court of Arbitration for Sport, with the Algerian Soccer Federation and USM Alger challenging a decision by the Confederation of African Football to allow the Moroccan club to wear it. The laws of soccer state that equipment must not have any political, religious or personal slogans, statements or images, but Berkane has worn it the whole season. The court says the two sides are currently exchanging written submissions and no timetable for appointing a panel of judges or a date for a hearing have been set yet.
Sao Tome said Wednesday it would demand compensation from Portugal for damage caused by colonialism. Last week, Portugal's president said late on Tuesday that his country was responsible for crimes committed during the transatlantic slave trade and the colonial era, and suggested there was a need for reparations. Other than Sao Tome, Portugal also colonized Angola, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique. Portugal's rule was characterized by violence, dispossession and cultural genocide. African countries are increasingly getting bolder with their former colonial rulers. In 2021, Germany agreed to pay Namibia 1.1 billion euros for genocide it committed there. In the DRC, people have pushed President Tshisekedi to demand reparations from Belgium for colonial violence. Afrobeat star Tiwa Savage makes her acting debut in Nigerian movie drama Water and Gary. The singer stars as Aisha in the Prime Video production.
well, I've never done anything like this before. And we were saying earlier, like, you know, myself and Miji, who's the director, yeah, this is his first as well. So I would say we were kind of winging it. But it turned out good. It turned out really, really good. And I think because it was the first for both of us, we were kind of really helping each other out and very supportive of each other. So.
While Savage says that she and debut director Miji Alabi were winging it when they embarked on the project, she's happy with the result. Savage is also the executive producer of the film as well as writer and producer of its soundtrack.
It's a drama. It's about a girl called Aisha, played by myself, and it's a story about love, betrayal. You know, she left her hood to pursue her dreams as a fashion designer, and obviously when she came back home, so many things have changed, and that's where the drama starts.
The initial idea behind the movie was supposed to be a visual project to accompany music Savage had written 2 years earlier.
You don't know how those guys are. Some of us not just run away like you.
Initially, it was the other way around. This was supposed to be a visual project for the music. And then when we started filming, I didn't like any of the music that I'd already done already, because like I feel like music lives in the moment in time, and this is like 2 years later. So I said, scrap everything. I'm gonna go away for like a week, and I'm gonna do a whole new soundtrack. And that's what I did, because now I was more into the movie, and I felt like I could make something stronger as a soundtrack.
It premieres on Prime Video on May 10.
Tonight, breaking news as we come on the air this Friday night. Authorities just moments ago saying, get out now. In a key area outside Houston, mandatory evacuations, the rescues amid horrific flooding, the extraordinary images coming in. In New York City, the biggest witness yet in Donald Trump's criminal trial is one-time aide Hope Hicks crying on the stand. And outside New York tonight, the deadly explosion, the home destroyed. First tonight, that urgent plea from authorities in Texas for some to get out now. And the images coming in now, devastating flooding across parts of Texas. First responders and the water rescues.
Oh my God, he's going in the water. Oh my God. Oh my God.
A tractor trailer floating away after trying to drive through deep water. A massive tornado on the ground, the family trying to run to safety.
Oh my gosh. Get in. Get in the car. Get in the car.
A tornado touching down in Hawley, Texas. A family of 5 hiding in their home. They survived, the home did not. In New York City, once one of Donald Trump's closest aides, Hope Hicks, takes the stand for the prosecution. What she said and the moment she started crying, the judge calling for a break. Outside New York City, that deadly home explosion, a retired police officer killed in the blast in New Jersey. A second victim tonight in critical condition, burns across 90% of his body. The blast fell blocks away. At this hour, massive new protests breaking out here in New York City just hours after police cleared out encampments at NYU. Tonight, the Texas Congressman Henry Cuellar and his wife indicted on federal conspiracy and bribery charges. Prosecutors accusing them of taking nearly $600,000 in bribes from foreign businesses. What they're saying tonight. In Turks and Caicos, yet another case. An American husband and father facing a possible 12 years in prison after what airport security found. The chilling discovery of the search for a missing American and his 2 friends, 2 brothers in Mexico, what authorities have now revealed tonight. A high school student here in the U.S. hit with a bullet while sitting inside her high school, the bullet coming through the window. Tonight, President Biden honoring 19 people with the Medal of Freedom. The woman known as the grandmother of Juneteenth, honored tonight. Also bird flu, authorities on the symptoms after that dairy farm worker came down with it. And there is news tonight on that part of I-95 shut down here in the Northeast after that explosion.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and we begin tonight here with the breaking news. Authorities just moments ago warning residents to get out in areas outside Houston amid an unfolding emergency there. The devastating flooding getting worse tonight. Mandatory evacuations, high water rescues. In Shepherd, Texas, north of Houston, this 18-wheeler washed off the highway. The driver in that yellow shirt there climbing out through the window. Nearby in Huntsville, Texas, a man rescued with ropes after clinging to trees there for hours. Meantime, tornado striking central Texas. A storm chaser capturing this one in Hawley, that's near Abilene. Moments later, a family racing toward his vehicle. He rushes them to the hospital. That tornado leaving a trail of devastation. At least 30 homes completely destroyed. Tonight, a tornado threat across that region for the 3rd straight night as authorities now warn the dangerous floodwaters in some places are only going to rise. Our chief national correspondent Matt Upton leading us off. He's outside Houston tonight.
Tonight, mandatory evacuations and water rescues in East Texas. First responders and boats pulling people out of neighborhoods north of Houston.
They pushed me off into the trees, and I got on top of my car, and I called for help, and that's when I heard him screaming back there, and I let the police know that he was back there too. You live back there? Yeah, I did. I left my home. Oh my God, he's going in the water.
In Shepherd, Texas, that 18-wheeler veering off into a creek, the driver in the yellow shirt climbing out of the cab as the truck bobs and then sinks. Outside Huntsville, Good Samaritan spotting this man clinging to a tree. They use ropes to pull him to safety. He'd been stuck there for hours.
This threat is ongoing, and it's going to get worse.
While the rivers rose near Houston, tornadoes threatening parts of Texas again tonight. With a massive twister on the ground just outside Abilene in the town of Hodges, storm chaser Freddie McKinney spotting the family, bloody, running from the wreckage.
Get in! Get in the car! Get in the car! Please, God, help!
McKinney rushing Casey and Wes Lambert and the kids Lane and Allie to the hospital. Casey holding her injured son Lane, recounting the moments to our station, KTXS.
Wes at one point reached up to cover my head, and he, at that point, the suction became so strong, it sucked Lane from Wes's arms.
Not far from there, this massive twister leveling homes in Hawley, Texas. Joseph Torres telling on Maria Villarreal his pregnant girlfriend and the rest of his family are lucky to have survived.
This is your home. How tough is it to see over your shoulder now looking back?
My dad and my mom, they worked so hard to give us everything, to give us this house, blood, sweat, and tears into this house. It's really heartbreaking to see.
Just an awful scene unfolding tonight in Texas. Look at that picture right there with Matt Gutman. He is north of Houston, Cleveland, Texas tonight. And Matt, we don't need you to tell us here. We can see it from the pictures, but authorities are warning this flooding could actually worsen in the coming hours.
It's not nearly over, David. Our weather team has been tracking tornadoes and severe weather across Texas. From Lubbock all the way down to San Angelo, there is that tornado watch and, of course, a severe thunderstorm watch all the way down to Del Rio. That could bring giant hail and damaging winds. And out here in southeast Texas, you may be able to make out the tops of those RVs behind me, but there are also about a dozen cars almost entirely submerged. And just south of here, city officials from Houston are now warning that people have only several hours to get out of those homes because these floodwaters are going to continue to rise. And they're saying that they could have hundreds of homes and businesses completely flooded out over the next 24 to 48 hours, David.
Yeah, everyone should take these warnings very seriously. Matt Gutman and the crew, we thank you. Come on back to dry land there. Here in New York City tonight at Donald Trump's criminal trial, one of the most high-profile witnesses yet, Hope Hicks, taking the stand for the prosecution, once one of Donald Trump's closest aides. What she said today and the moment she started crying, the judge calling for a break. Aaron Petersky at the courthouse again tonight.
She was Donald Trump's most trusted aide.
It's Hope Hicks, the great Hope Hicks.
And today on the witness stand, Hope Hicks taking the jury back to the final weeks of the 2016 campaign and the release of the explosive Access Hollywood tape, Trump bragging about groping women.
When you're sorry, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Hicks testified the tape left her a little stunned. She said she knew immediately it would be a massive story, a damaging development to the campaign, and a crisis. The jury saw video Trump recorded trying to contain the damage.
I said it. I was wrong, and I apologize.
Prosecutors say the damage control didn't end there. That Trump quickly directed a $130,000 hush payment to former porn star Stormy Daniels, so voters wouldn't hear about their alleged affair. Michael Cohen, Trump's fixer at the time, wired the money and was later reimbursed by Trump, who prosecutors charged illegally falsified business records to make it look like an ordinary legal expense. Today, Hicks testified Trump told her Cohen paid Daniels on his own, out of the kindness of his own heart. But she didn't believe it, telling the jury that would be out of character for Michael. I didn't know Michael to be a particularly charitable person or selfless person. Trump denies the affair with Daniels. His lawyers insist his only interest in keeping her quiet was to protect his family, not his campaign. But Hicks testified Trump later told her it would have been bad to have that story come out before the election. It was at that moment Hicks broke down, dissolving into tears. Judge Juan Rashan calling a brief recess. Hicks walked out to compose herself, Trump barely looking up. When she returned, a brief and gentle cross-examination. Hicks spoke glowingly of Trump, saying, "I don't think he wanted anyone in his family to be hurt or embarrassed by anything that was happening in the campaign." When she finished, Trump turning to watch as Hicks exited the courtroom. And after, this was all he had to say about her testimony.
I was very interested in what took place today.
Hope Hicks gave the jury a lot to think about Michael Cohen, who will soon take his place on the witness stand. She said that Cohen often went rogue and was only Trump's fixer because he first broke things. But when Trump told her that Cohen had paid Stormy Daniels out of the kindness of his heart, she didn't believe it, telling the jury Cohen wasn't that kind of guy, David.
A lot for the jury to take in tonight. Aaron Petersky, thank you. Now to the horrific scene outside New York City, the deadly home explosion tonight. Pieces scattered in every direction. It was felt blocks away. We have learned a retired police officer was killed in the blast. A second victim is in critical condition tonight, burns across 90% of his body. ABC's Ike Kachachi is on the scene in South River, New Jersey tonight.
Tonight, authorities are investigating what triggered a massive blast that flattened this suburban home, killing a former police officer and leaving another man in critical condition.
It was just a big boom. The whole ground shook.
First responders in South River, New Jersey called to the scene just after 7 p.m., arriving to find the residents engulfed in flames and in ruins.
2.5 story. We're frame structure completely level, possible gas leak.
Firefighters quickly containing the blaze, wreckage strewn across the neighborhood.
A lot of debris on the roadway, a lot of debris on other lawns.
Nearby homes and vehicles sustaining damage. The garage doors of this house caving in. Neighbors say the explosion could be felt for blocks.
We're astonished by the debris. The explosion was loud, but we just saw the debris and just could not comprehend.
62-year-old retired Newark police officer Kevin Gilbert killed in the blast. The department today offering their condolences to his loved ones, saying he served the force for 26 years. Oh, David, it's still an active scene at the home behind me. Officials say the second man injured in this blast is related to the retired officer who died. He's in critical conditions with burns to 90% of his body. David?
Ike Kachachi with us tonight. Ike, thank you. In New York City at this hour, the new protests tonight, the large demonstrations at NYU, and this all comes just hours after police had cleared out encampments at NYU. Stephanie Ramos is there.
Tonight, massive new protests just outside NYU. Hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters now gathering on the streets.
I think student movements historically have brought about change.
It comes just hours after the NYPD arrested more than 50 people and cleared out tents at NYU and the new school. Tonight, the president of Columbia University is speaking out in a video statement for the first time since calling in police to clear that campus building seized by protesters.
It was a violent act that put our students at risk, as well as putting the protesters at risk.
And tonight, across college campuses, confrontations between protest groups now flaring.
Show me your face! Show me your face!
At the University of Chicago, counter-protesters facing off with pro-Palestinian protesters.
USA! USA!
Nobody wants to see escalation. Nobody wants to see students and peers pitted against each other.
And a disturbing turn at Ole Miss after this video surfaced showing a pro-Palestinian demonstrator subjected to racist taunts. The school now investigating reports of offensive behavior at that protest. After weeks of turmoil, college campuses on edge as several push forward with graduation ceremonies this weekend. Students at Ohio State say they're relieved after seeing peaceful protests on campus this week.
It was good to see last night both sides cooperating with each other, and I think that's a really good sign going into Sunday.
Here outside NYU, despite NYPD officers clearing tents, there are still protests in this area tonight. Officers escorting the group to ensure the demonstration remains peaceful. David.
All right, Stephanie Ramos on this all week long for us. Stephanie, we appreciate it. We turn now to a well-known member of Congress. Texas Congressman Henry Cuellar and his wife Imelda have been indicted on federal conspiracy and bribery charges. Prosecutors accusing them of taking nearly $600,000 in bribes from foreign businesses. The congressman insists they're innocent. Here's Rachel Scott.
2 years after FBI agents raided his Texas home, tonight Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar and his wife Imelda indicted by the Justice Department on charges of conspiracy, bribery, and money laundering. Prosecutors allege Cuellar was behind an elaborate scheme, accepting $600,000 in bribes from an energy company in Azerbaijan and a Mexican bank, money that was allegedly laundered through sham consulting contracts. In exchange, Cuellar allegedly agreed to use his position as a U.S. congressman to push policies that would benefit the bank in Azerbaijan, which borders Iran and Russia. Prosecutors obtaining these text messages, which they say show a diplomat referring to Cuellar as El Jefe or boss, after the congressman said he submitted language. Tonight in a statement, Cuellar writing, "I want to be clear that both my wife and I are innocent of these allegations." If convicted on all charges, Cuellar and his wife could face decades behind bars. David.
Rachel Scott, live in Washington. Rachel, thank you. Tonight, authorities searching for a missing American and 2 Australian friends. They've now found bodies at the base of a cliff in Baja California, Mexico, but authorities won't say how many bodies, and they certainly won't confirm identities yet. American Jack Carter Road, right there on the right, along with brothers Jake and Colin Robinson, disappeared several days ago now. They were on a surfing trip. A source telling ABC News the bodies were found near a burned white pickup truck. In Turks and Caicos tonight, we have learned of another case of an American husband and father facing a possible 12 years in prison after what airport security found. ABC's Matt Rivers is there for us.
Tonight, Brian and Ashley Hagerich entering a courthouse in Turks and Caicos hand in hand, hoping for a lighter sentence after he was charged with having ammunition in a suitcase. Hagerich, a father of 2 from outside of Pittsburgh, facing what could be 12 years in prison.
I feel like I'm a failure. I feel like I've let them down in the worst unimaginable way possible.
Back in February, the couple and their children were wrapping up a vacation when authorities found a small box of hunting ammo in Hagerich's luggage during a random airport security check. How did you not know that the ammo was in there?
I mean, it's a quite large bag, multiple compartments. It was overlooked when packing.
But a tough new amendment to the law in Turks and Caicos mandates a minimum sentence of 12 years for any illegal ammo or firearms brought to the islands. Hagerich pleading guilty, but forced to remain on the island for the last 80 days, separated from his family, while he awaits sentencing. He is now one of 4 Americans facing jail time on similar charges, including Oklahoma father Ryan Watson, who was detained in April after police say loose rounds were found in his carry-on bag. Tonight, after more than 4 hours of arguments, Hagerich leaving court with his wife. He says while he takes full responsibility for his actions, he is praying for leniency.
I'm a man of character, integrity, did not have intent in this. If there are ways that this can be dealt with without separating my family from for 12 years, I really hope that that's considered.
And David, the judge did not hand down a sentence earlier today, which means that Brian Hagerich will have to wait until the end of this month to learn his fate.
David, Matt Rivers there in Turks and Caicos for us. Matt, thank you. When we come back here tonight, a high school student hit with a bullet. She was inside a classroom, the bullet coming through the window. We also have news on bird flu tonight, the symptoms revealed for that dairy worker here in the U.S. in a moment. Tonight, a high school student wounded by a stray bullet coming through the window of her school in Washington, D.C. Surveillance showing the shootout down the street. A 17-year-old girl grazed in the head while in a second-floor classroom inside Dunbar High School. She is expected to recover. Tonight, work crews in Norwalk, Connecticut are working to demolish a heavily damaged bridge, aiming to reopen I-95 by Monday. The overpass badly damaged when a tanker truck hauling gasoline crashed, burst into flames. They do hope that I-95 in both directions will be open for Monday's commute. When we come back here tonight, what we're now learning about symptoms of bird flu for that dairy farm worker here in the U.S. To the index, and we have learned more tonight about that very rare human case of bird flu here in the U.S. A dairy farm worker in Texas contracting the virus from an infected cow in March. Researchers say he had none of the typical symptoms, such as fever or respiratory problems. They say his only major symptom was pink eye. When we come back here tonight, in '89, she pledged to march 1,400 miles to Washington for a reason. But what's happened tonight? Finally tonight, our Persons of the Week, the Medal of Freedom. Tonight at the White House in honor, a long time coming.
Today, we honor Medgar Evers and his family's pain and purpose.
President Biden posthumously awarding the Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in our country, to civil rights giant Medgar Evers, his daughter Rena, at the White House. After serving in World War II, Medgar Evers would come home to battle discrimination here, leading demonstrations, rallies, sit-ins, organizing voter registration drives.
We're going to keep the pressure on the downtown merchants.
He was assassinated in 1963, his daughter Rena, just a little girl, right there in the white dress, wiping away tears at his funeral.
Medgar Evers' legacy casts a ray of light on our quest to redeem the soul of our nation.
Also honored tonight, Opal Lee, 97 years old, called by many the grandmother of Juneteenth. For decades, pushing for the country to recognize Juneteenth as a national holiday. Juneteenth commemorates the day slaves in Texas were told that they were free 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation.
Ms. Opal Lee made it her mission to make history, not erase it. We're a better nation because of it.
It was 2016, 89 years old, Opal pledging to walk from Texas to Washington 1,400 miles to deliver a petition to Congress for that holiday. In 2020, at 93, in the middle of the pandemic, still delivering a petition.
I thought if I did, people would take notice that Juneteenth was special, that it meant freedom for everybody.
Opal by the president's side as he signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day into law. Tonight, Opal telling us, although I've received many honors and awards in my 97 years, none can compare to getting the nation's highest honor.
Under our skin, we're all the same. And so we need to be about the business of helping each other.
So well deserved. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Moore, America's most watched newscast.
On this Friday night, a major break in the murder of a Sikh separatist leader in D.C. The 3 alleged hitmen charged with their suspected links to the Indian government.
Others may have played a role in this homicide.
What's being called India's incompetent campaign against Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a global news investigation. The threat of foreign interference. Inquiry commissioner's conclusions about meddling in Canada's elections. In it for the long haul.
The morale has not dropped.
The vow from pro-Palestinian protesters to stand their ground. And the goal to grow women's hockey. And she scores! The game plan to power the PWHL forward.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
I'm here today to announce.
On this Friday night, a major break in the murder of a Sikh separatist leader in D.C. The 3 alleged hitmen charged with their suspected links to the Indian government.
Others may have played a role in this homicide.
What's being called India's incompetent campaign against Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a global news investigation. The threat of foreign interference. Inquiry Commissioner's conclusions about meddling in Canada's elections. In it for the long haul.
The morale has not dropped.
The vow for pro-Palestinian protesters to stand their ground. And the goal to grow women's hockey. And she scores! The game plan to power the PWHL forward.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
I'm here today to announce that we arrested and charged 3 individuals for first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder in relation to Hardeep Nijjar's homicide.
A major development tonight in a high-profile assassination last summer that took place on Canadian soil. Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a prominent Sikh activist, was gunned down as he was heading home from his local Gurdwara in Surrey, BC. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We begin with the murder case that's put tremendous pressure on Canada's diplomatic relationship with India. In a highly unusual move last fall, the Prime Minister blamed agents at the Indian state for the murder of a Canadian. And tonight, 3 men, all Indian nationals, are in custody. We've got this story covered for you from multiple angles tonight. We're going to begin with Jeff Semple, who's in Surrey, BC. Jeff, what do we know about the links to the Indian government?
Well, Farah, Hardeep Nijjar was shot and killed in the parking lot of his Sikh temple here behind me, and sources close to the investigation say they believe India's Foreign Intelligence Agency may have been responsible. It's the news Hardeep Nijjar's friends and family have been waiting a year to hear.
So I think there's a mixed feeling, one of relief, but also one of concern as to what will Canada do to kind of curb this issue of public safety that we're facing.
Nijjar was president of one of Canada's largest Sikh temples with tens of thousands of members. The murder sent shockwaves across this community and triggered an international firestorm.
Today I'm rising to inform the House of an extremely serious matter.
The Prime Minister accused Indian government agents of Nijjar's murder, but Justin Trudeau provided no details or evidence to support that claim, which India furiously denied. Today, the RCMP backed up that allegation.
Thank you all for joining us today.
Police arrested 3 Indian nationals in Edmonton, accused in the murder, and released these photos and videos of their vehicles. Sources say the alleged hitmen entered Canada on student visas, but are actually suspected members of organized crime. And sources believe they may have been acting on orders from India's Foreign Intelligence Agency, which reports directly to India's Prime Minister.
There are separate and distinct investigations ongoing into these matters, certainly not limited to the involvement of the people arrested today. And these efforts include investigating connections to the government of India.
Under the Modi government, India has just become much more assertive and aggressive.
Nijjar was a high-profile member of the International Khalistan movement, campaigning for an independent Sikh state in India's Punjab region.
From the Indian government's perspective, they have sort of viewed now what we would call activists as extremists, as threats to their national security.
For years, the Indian government had called for Nijjar's arrest, claiming he was the leader of an armed separatist group launching attacks in India, including this one targeting a cinema. But sources say Indian officials provided no credible evidence to support those claims. Sources say the evidence points instead to a covert campaign by Indian officials to silence prominent Sikh separatists abroad.
They think they can get away with it, simply because history has proven that perpetrators and states are rarely held accountable for acts of transnational repression.
This international law expert points to the United States, where a similar alleged assassination plot against this Sikh activist was thwarted last year.
These threats are continuous.
India reportedly blamed rogue intelligence officials, and unlike Trudeau, the US downplayed the Indian government's involvement.
Considering the growing importance of India, and Modi is being received in the West, with open arms, and the red carpet is being rolled out.
She says Indian officials may have sought to insulate themselves by hiring contract killers, but not without risk.
They need to reach out to some unsavory characters, and then the security of the operation isn't very good because it could already be compromised by Western intelligence, or who knows, you get someone who's indiscreet.
But even if the RCMP has evidence of Indian government involvement, its consular officials are protected by diplomatic immunity.
The uncomfortable truth is that a foreign diplomat who might have participated in a serious crime cannot be charged and cannot be detained or arrested.
Publicly, the RCMP refused to comment on India's role in Nijjar's killing, but said Indian officials haven't exactly been helpful.
Well, I'll be frank, I'll characterize that collaboration as rather challenging and difficult for the last several years.
And representatives from Surrey's Sikh community held a press conference here late today, and they called the arrest an important first step, but said that they will not rest or feel safe here until those responsible for orchestrating this attack, in their view, representatives of the Indian government, are finally brought to justice. Farah?
Jeff Semple in Surrey, BC. Thank you, Jeff. We go next to our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stevenson, on the national security angle here. Mercedes, how significant are the security implications of today's arrests?
Well, Farah, they're tremendously significant on a number of levels. First of all, it raises the question of how these individuals had been in Canada, we're hearing, for 3 to 5 years potentially without being detected. Who were they? Why were they connected to the Indian government, as is being alleged they may have been? Who recruited them? That's going to be a huge question, because if that person is a diplomat who is working for the Indian government, if they were in fact acting on behalf of the Indian government, they could have diplomatic immunity. Beyond that, there's questions about the foreign student program now. If these individuals were able to come in on foreign student visas without being detected, there will be questions about what the security around that program looks like and whether or not it's vetting people carefully enough. And of course, then there's the question of how many other plots there might be against other Canadian citizens, and whether the RCMP and CSIS have enough resources to foil those plots.
Mercedes, now politically, does this validate what the government's long claimed, and how is it going to impact Canada's relationship with India going forward?
I think there's more to be seen publicly from the government on exactly what evidence they have. But as you heard from Jeff, our sources are certainly indicating that they believe there may have been a significant link to the Indian government. I expect that you may see some of that kind of trial, but there's also that key point that the RCMP say there are still ongoing police investigations. That means there are other people who they are still looking at, and they may not want to show their hand on that just yet. But the fact that the Indian government was trying to have Mr. Najjar sent back to India for years, and then that he became targeted, will be significant. The Indian government is not likely to be happy about any of these allegations, and they've made it clear before they are willing to make it very difficult for Canadians to get visas to go to India, and of course they have significant economic pull. And then there's the geostrategic implications about what it will mean for Canada's role in the Indo-Pacific.
Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Thank you, Mercedes. Now, the RCMP arrest came on the same day Canada's Commission into Foreign Interference released its interim report. India was among the state's Commissioner Marie-Josée Augue singled out as having taken part in a range of activities that seek to influence Canadian communities and politicians. Our chief political correspondent, David Aiken's been looking into the report. David, what did Commissioner Augue have to say about India?
Well, she said there is certainly credible evidence that India is engaging in political interference in Canadian elections, mostly by trying to covertly funnel money towards pro-India candidates. India, for the record, has rejected those allegations. That said, the single biggest threat actor when it comes to our elections is the People's Republic of China.
She says, make no mistake, foreign interference did occur in the last two elections, but she finds that it did not undermine the integrity of the electoral system, and she says the Liberals would have won both elections with or without foreign interference. But she is just as clear that foreign interference is causing great harm to Canada's democracy.
The acts of interference that occurred, some of these acts have been established while others remain only suspected, are a stain on our electoral process.
The inquiry was called after Global News and the Globe and Mail first reported on allegations of political interference by state actors from China. Augue will suggest ways the government can better deter and counter foreign interference in her second and final report due at the end of the year.
Foreign interference is a real occurrence and a serious threat, and one that is probably impossible to completely eradicate. But we must do all that we can to detect, prevent, and counter it.
David, this murder in Surrey seems to suggest that foreign interference in Canadian domestic affairs is not just about elections. So can this inquiry address any of that?
Not really. Justice Augue has been given a very specific mandate to focus only on the 2019 and 2021 elections. The murder in Surrey did come up during the inquiry's public hearings. A coalition of groups representing Sikh Canadians, they did have standing in this inquiry, but addressing that broader issue of intimidation by foreign actors, that's really a question for the government.
We're going to continue to do everything we can do to detect and disrupt this foreign interference. And we're the first government that has put in place a series of measures, including the report of Commissioner Hogg, the preliminary report that was released on Friday.
And opposition parties are also pushing the government on the same issue. Farah.
David Aiken in Ottawa. Thank you, David. There are indications tonight of a possible agreement between Israel and Hamas to de-escalate the crisis in the Middle East. Talks are scheduled this weekend between the two sides in Cairo, Egypt. Still, though, tanks remain parked on the border with Gaza as Israel's invasion of the southern city of Rafah looms. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed total victory in Gaza. But tonight, the indications are that some compromises may be in the works. The Associated Press is reporting a potential phased de-escalation. The first phase would have female civilian hostages be freed in exchange for Palestinian prisoners in Israel. And if that happens, then 6 weeks after, all remaining hostages would be released in exchange for more prisoners. And then the third phase would see the return of the remains of the deceased hostages. Student protests expand ahead. The campus demonstrations that are growing across Canadian universities. Protests against the conflict in Gaza are spreading across Canadian university campuses. Demonstrators at the University of Toronto were told to leave by 10 p.m. last night, but the school says they won't be removed as long as the protests remain peaceful. And at McGill University in Montreal, protests have stretched into a 7th day. Students have vowed to stay until their demands are met. Neethu Garcha reports on the protests as universities grapple with what to do about them.
On the second day of the pro-Palestinian encampment at the University of Toronto, the peaceful demonstration appears to have expanded, with protesters expressing their commitment for the long term. Despite the administration's initial request for them to leave, protesters were allowed to stay overnight, provided their activities remained peaceful.
I think the university is wisely chosen not to use police force to try to disperse this encampment.
Concerns have been raised by Jewish student groups over rising tensions on campus.
This is a safe place for Jewish students, faculty, and staff. In order for Israelis and Palestinians to have a future together, we need more students like this who are willing to challenge restrictions placed on Palestinian freedom.
At McGill University, pressure is ramping up for officials to take action after 2 opposing demonstrations clashed on the campus Thursday.
A lot of people still have this commitment, and we don't, the morale has not dropped.
With calls from Jewish groups for universities to enforce existing policies against harassment and intimidation, the encampment demanding McGill divest from companies with Israeli ties is in its 7th day.
Those funds are directly leading to bombing campaigns, to militarization, to blocking aid deliveries. So they're participating actively and materially in the war and in the genocide.
At the University of British Columbia, a growing encampment is in its 5th day, also calling for divestment and for the university to join a global academic boycott of Israeli universities. Students plan to continue their demonstration until those demands are met. Neethu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
The prelude to an assassination. Coming up, what's being called India's coercive campaign against Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Global News investigation. We're turning now to our top story in the arrest of 3 Indian nationals in connection to the killing of BC Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Jeff Semple joins us again from Surrey, BC. Jeff, you, along with the Global News investigative team, have been looking into the lead-up to Nijjar's murder last June. What have you learned?
Well, our investigation has found that Nijjar's murder was the culmination of a years-long campaign by the Indian government that our sources have described as both coercive and incompetent. 5 years before Hardeep Nijjar was murdered, sources say Indian officials sent an urgent message to the RCMP, claiming India was about to be attacked by a terrorist bomb plot. To stop it, the RCMP needed to arrest Nijjar immediately. So the RCMP took the BC Sikh leader into custody, but sources say it quickly became apparent India had no credible evidence against him. So the Mounties released Nijjar, but India didn't stop there.
India is emboldened. They are becoming a regional powerhouse and they want to be taken more serious.
For almost a decade, Indian officials filed extradition requests and Interpol notices demanding Nijjar's arrest, claiming he was the mastermind behind an armed Sikh separatist group planning attacks on India. In 2015, India claimed this video was evidence of Nijjar organizing a weapons training camp in BC. Sources say the RCMP investigated, but found no evidence to support the claim from India's intelligence agency.
I would say they're not known as a very good intelligence agency. There's certain countries that Canada knows you have to take their information with a grain of salt.
And some of their evidence was also allegedly obtained through torture. This permanent resident of Canada and friend of Nijjar's returned to India for his wedding in 2016. He says he was arrested, tortured, and later released, but his lawyer says India is not allowing him to return to Canada.
There's a lot of torture. There's a lot of confessions that are solicited under torture. And India presents these dossiers and expects everyone to act upon them.
Canada's Sikh community is the largest outside of India, and the Indian government has long alleged that Canada is a hotbed of militant Khalistan separatists, pointing to public campaigning for an independent Sikh state in India, and blaming Canada for attacks such as the Air India bombing 40 years ago that killed 329 people, mostly Canadians.
There's a grain of truth in this. If you look back at the Air India, the bombing, Canadian security clearly dropped the ball. There was a massive intelligence failure. The only difference is the threat environment has changed, and you don't have Sikh extremism.
Experts say the Sikh separatist threat in India today is almost non-existent, but the fight against the Khalistan movement abroad plays well politically at home.
These assassinations have really burnished Modi's credentials as someone that's going to protect India. And it burnished Modi's image of himself as India's strongman.
The Indian government has fiercely denied playing any role in Nijjar's murder, and India, meanwhile, is in the midst of an election, with Prime Minister Modi widely expected to win a consecutive third term. Farah?
Jeff Semple in Surrey, BC. Thanks, Jeff. Scoring goals. Next, the Canadian women buying in and giving back for the love of the game. The pursuit for the Professional Women's Hockey League's ultimate prize, the Walter Cup, is heating up. 3 teams are chasing the final 2 playoff positions this weekend. But throughout the entire inaugural season, 2 Canadian players have gone above and beyond to help grow the game. As Mike Drollet explains, Renata Fast and Emily Clark are building the fan base of the future.
Moving close now, Fast shoots, she scores! For years, Renata Fast wondered what could be for her hockey career. There was U.S. college hockey, the Olympics, and not much in between.
So the only thing I really aspired to do was to play on that national team.
Heather with the ball and Clark! Score! Emily Clark could roof a puck like a few others.
Top shelf beauty!
Yet she knew skill could only take her so far.
Yeah, growing up, you want to be the first girl in the NHL, and then at some point, whether you realize it or not, that dream just kind of fades, and it's not a reality, so you don't really even think about it because it wasn't a dream that you could have.
Well, now, as the inaugural PWHL season comes to an end, they can see the dream clearly.
Nothing has come easy for the women of the PWHL. From league conception to first puck drop, it was only 6 months, so they didn't have time to come up with team names or anything beyond basic jerseys. But sometimes challenges create opportunities, and now the league can evolve with input from its fervent fan base.
Players like Fast and Clark are doing their part by hosting families they've met through various charities and hockey leagues at each game. As Olympians, they know they're role models to young boys and girls, but now, with a league of their own, they become ambassadors to the sport.
I'm so excited to watch it grow.
Grow indeed. Fast also works in development with the Burlington Girls Hockey Club, which is thriving in part because of the PWHL.
When you see some of the footage and stuff coming out of the PWHL games, it's flooded with Barracudas jerseys, Oakville Hornets jerseys. Like, you see them, they just stick out because you see them there. So it means it's drawing the attention of a lot of these girls.
A lot of girls with big dreams and no more limits. Mike Drollet, Global News Toronto.
And that's Global National for this Friday night. I'm Farah Nasser. Tonight's Your Canada is downtown Calgary, and we love seeing your Canada, so please keep emailing us your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel's killed at least 26 people in Gaza over the past day. An airstrike on a home in Rafah killed at least 6 Palestinians, 4 of them children. This is Sana Zaroub, the child's aunt.
3 missiles hit the innocent children. A mother and 2 girls were sleeping in her lap. They were sleeping in her lap. The 2 girls, do you know what it means to be sleeping in their mother's lap? They are in pieces. They were in grade 1 and grade 6. Bisan and Basmala. Bisan and Basmala were sleeping in their mother's lap. They are in pieces. They slept in their mother's lap and now they are in pieces. How did the Israelis benefit from this? What did they benefit from killing the innocent children?
Israel's refused to retreat from its threat of an expected ground invasion of Rafah, despite warnings it would be absolutely catastrophic. In other news from Gaza, Israeli authorities confirmed a prominent Palestinian doctor died in an Israeli prison in what Palestinian authorities are calling an assassination. Adnan al-Bursh, a surgeon, the head of orthopedics at Al-Shifa Hospital, was detained by Israel over 4 months ago while he'd been working at Al-Auda Hospital in North Gaza. UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese said in response to al-Bursh's death, quote, "How many more lives will have to be taken before UN member states act to protect the Palestinians?" she asked. On Thursday, Israeli prison authorities released 64 Palestinians they detained in Gaza. One of the detainees was returned dead, another in critical condition. This is Jamal Oisi, one of the released prisoners, describing his arrest.
I took my children and we were leaving the area, and we were going towards a safer place, such as Deir el-Balah, Khan Yunis, Mawasi, Rafah. I wanted them to be in a safe place, but they left without me. The Israeli soldiers caught me and they put me in a house. They asked me to take off all my clothes, and I stayed in my underwear. Then they brought a truck and put us inside the truck. They started to beat us. They were beating me in my face. We reached the detention area, hoping they would stop beating, but they didn't.
International Criminal Court prosecutor Karim Khan is warning the court's, quote, independence and impartiality are undermined when individuals threaten to retaliate, unquote, after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called news of possible ICC arrest warrants against himself and other top Israeli officials a, quote, anti-Semitic hate crime. As the genocide in Gaza continues, the student protest movement here in the U.S. keeps growing. The Associated Press reports nearly 2,200 people have now been arrested nationwide across college and university campuses. President Biden addressed the protests Thursday.
Dissent is essential to democracy, but dissent must never lead to disorder or to denying the rights of others so students can finish the semester and their college education. Look, it's basically a matter of fairness. It's a matter of what's right. There's the right to protest, but not the right to cause chaos.
President Biden also said the historic student uprising will not affect U.S. policy in the Middle East. On Thursday, police arrested students at Portland State University, the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, and here in New York, SUNY's Purchase and New Paltz campuses. Meanwhile, new solidarity encampments went up in recent days at the University of Washington and the University of Toronto, among others. Video of Dartmouth College history professor Annelies Orlak being violently arrested Wednesday night has prompted outrage. Orlak, who is also chair of Jewish studies at Dartmouth, was trying to protect students along with other faculty members as they were attacked by police. Police made over 90 arrests there that night. Here in New York, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office says it's investigating after a police officer fired a gunshot on the Columbia campus while the NYPD was forcing out protesters on Tuesday night from Hamilton Hall. No one was harmed in the shooting. Students at Rutgers University in New Jersey and the University of Minnesota have voluntarily disassembled their encampments after school leadership agreed to some of their demands and to continue conversations with the protesters. International solidarity encampments are also spreading, including in Italy, Australia, Mexico, and Tunisia. In France, students at the prestigious Sciences Po escalated their protest after the school rejected demands to review its relationship with Israel. Several students announced they're starting a hunger strike.
The student will continue her hunger strike until the following demand is met by Sciences Po: the inscription on its agenda and the holding of a vote without anonymity at the Council of the Institute to investigate the ties with Israeli universities who are contributing to the genocide.
The Pentagon has acknowledged that a U.S. drone strike in Syria, which was initially reported to have successfully targeted an al-Qaeda senior leader, in fact killed a farmer. The strike took place last May, killing Lutfi Hassan Masta, a 56-year-old farmer who raised sheep, chickens, and cattle. After the attack, Masta's family and neighbors said he had no connections to al-Qaeda or any other armed groups. Russian armed forces may have executed Ukrainian soldiers who attempted to surrender or had already surrendered, which could amount to war crimes. That's according to a new report published by Human Rights Watch, which investigated incidents of what it described as apparent summary executions of at least 15 Ukrainian soldiers between December 2023 and February. In related news, the Biden administration has imposed new sanctions against hundreds of individuals and firms linked to Russia's war in Ukraine after accusing Moscow of illegally deploying chemical weapons against Ukrainian fighters. The sanctions include 20 firms based in China and Hong Kong. In Virginia, the historic case against U.S. military contractor CACI, brought by 3 Iraqi survivors of torture at the notorious Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, has ended in mistrial after the jury on Thursday failed to reach a unanimous verdict. The lawsuit against CACI was first filed by the Center for Constitutional Rights in 2008. Plaintiffs Suhail al-Shamari, Asad Zubai, and Salah al-Ajali had accused CACI of conspiring to commit war crimes at Abu Ghraib. The 3 were subjected to sexual abuse and other forms of torture by interrogators. We'll have more on the story later in the broadcast with the legal director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. The Biden administration announced a new rule expanding access to the Affordable Care Act for immigrants brought to the U.S. as children, known as Dreamers. The measure will allow recipients of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, to enroll in health care plans under Obamacare. Some 100,000 immigrants are expected to enroll. The Senate Budget Committee held a hearing this week on the fossil fuel industry's efforts to deceive the public about its role in fueling the climate crisis. Wednesday's hearing focused on what lawmakers identified as the 4th phase in big oil's climate deception, in which companies launched a widespread greenwashing campaign as they carried out business as usual. This is Senate Budget Committee Chair Sheldon Whitehouse.
Phase 4, put simply, is climate denial light. A green-leaning cover for the industry's continued covert operation through dark money, phony front groups, false economics, and relentless exertion of political influence to block meaningful climate safety progress.
A federal court of appeals has sided with the Justice Department and dismissed Juliana versus United States, the historic youth climate lawsuit against the U.S. government. The decision was made by a panel of 3 Trump-appointed judges from the Ninth Circuit. The group who brought the case, Our Children's Trust, is calling on the full court to reconsider the ruling and on the American public to contact the Biden administration to demand it stop persecuting climate activism. Kelsey Juliana, the named plaintiff in the case, spoke to Democracy Now! In 2019.
So we're looking at the ways that the federal government has very knowingly and willfully funded this climate crisis, and the way that they are continuing to stall and delay our climate case shows you exactly their priorities of their own self-interest and continuing this greedy fossil fuel economy rather than ensuring the constitutional rights of life, liberty, and property to all citizens, especially young.
The UK has started rounding up and detaining asylum seekers as part of its highly contested plan to deport migrants to Rwanda. Rights groups are hoping legal challenges can stop the deportation flights, which are expected to start as early as July. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservative government overrode a Supreme Court ruling in order to ram through the policy. On Thursday, London police arrested dozens of protesters who lay down on the road and slashed tires to stop a bus from carrying detainees to a barge that was converted into a migrant prison. Authorities were forced to postpone the planned transfer of asylum seekers. 2 Trump-appointed federal judges rejected a new Louisiana congressional map which created a second majority black district. The map was drawn up after another federal judge ruled a previous voting map, which had just one black majority district, violated the Voting Rights Act. Roughly 1/3 of Louisiana's population is black. It remains unclear which map Louisiana will be using in November, as the case is expected to reach the U.S. Supreme Court. In other election news, New York Democratic State Senator Timothy Kennedy easily won a special election Tuesday for the New York congressional seat vacated in February by Brian Higgins, another Democrat. House Republicans hold 217 seats, while Democrats have 213 seats with 5 current vacancies. In New York, prosecutors told a judge at the Manhattan Criminal Court they will retry Harvey Weinstein after the New York Court of Appeals overturned his 2020 rape conviction last week. The new trial is expected sometime after Labor Day. And today marks World Press Freedom Day. UNESCO awarded its World Press Freedom Prize to all Palestinian journalists covering Israel's war on Gaza. During a ceremony in Chile, the jury's chairperson, Maurizio Weibel, said, quote, "As humanity, we have a huge debt to their courage and commitment to freedom of expression," he said. Palestinian authorities say over 140 journalists and media workers, the vast majority of them Palestinian, have been killed since October 7th. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Democracy Now! Is funded by viewers like you. Please give today at democracynow.org/give.
Good evening, I'm William Brangham. Jeff Bennett and Amna Nawaz are away. On the NewsHour tonight, the Department of Justice and Google make closing arguments in a landmark trial that could change how we use the internet. Then, Trump White House Communications Director Hope Hicks takes the stand in the former president's hush money trial. And on World Press Freedom Day, a Palestinian journalist's first-hand account of his family's fight to survive the war in Gaza.
We here in Gaza suffer that we need our children to have a better future. We don't know if we are going to make it in the morning.
For public broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. There are signs tonight that high interest rates could finally be slowing U.S. job growth. The Labor Department reports that employers added a net of 175,000 jobs in April. That was well below expectations. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate inched up 0.1% to 3.9%. The Federal Reserve has said it needs to see a cooling of growth and inflation before it can cut interest rates. A sitting member of Congress, Texas Democrat Henry Cuellar and his wife, were arrested today on federal charges of bribery and conspiracy. They're accused of taking nearly $600,000 in bribes from a Mexican bank and an oil company controlled by Azerbaijan. In return, Cuellar allegedly pushed legislation favorable to Azerbaijan. The couple denies the charges. In Canada, police have arrested 3 people in the murder of a Sikh separatist leader in British Columbia last June. The 3 are Indian nationals. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had suggested that the Indian government was involved in the killing. Today, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police said they're looking at that possibility.
This investigation does not end here. We are aware that others may have played a role in this homicide, and we remain dedicated to finding and arresting each one of these individuals.
The Indian government has denied any involvement in the murder. College campuses across the country were somewhat quieter today after days of protests against the war in Gaza. All told, more than 2,300 demonstrators have been arrested so far. That includes at least a dozen early today at New York University. After the raid, police stood guard as workers cleaned out the protesters' encampment. A larger campsite had been cleared last month. The protest movement has also spread to universities in the Middle East, Europe, and beyond. In Australia, pro-Palestinian protesters are camped at the University of Sydney. Today, counter-protesters rallied with Israeli and Australian flags. In Paris, French police moved in and cleared out students who had been occupying the prestigious Sciences Po University.
I am here because the riot police removed me, but I'm here because I want to show my solidarity with the Palestinian people, and because I want this movement to spread to all the campuses.
Both the Australian and French protests were largely peaceful, with no reports of arrests. In Gaza, a Palestinian hospital reported at least 7 people were killed in an overnight Israeli airstrike on Rafah. Daylight revealed what was left of the home that bore the brunt of the attack, near the Egyptian border. Most of the dead were reported to be children. Meantime, a group representing Israeli hostages confirmed that a 49-year-old man died during the Hamas attack on Israel in October, but that his body had not yet been returned. 2 rocket launches today highlighted trailblazing ventures into space. China sent up a robotic craft to bring back samples from the far side of the moon. The first of its kind mission could take 2 months. And in Australia, a German company tested a rocket powered by paraffin, an ingredient in candle wax. The firm says this fuel could cut satellite launch costs in half. Back in this country, parts of southeastern Texas have been inundated after 9 inches of rain fell in just 24 hours. Some highways and schools around Houston were closed. A flood warning is in effect for a large area around the city. The rain came on fast and strong, forcing some to abandon their cars. Emergency crews had to carry out water rescues, and officials warned of worse to come along the San Jacinto River.
It is not your typical river flood. I know that folks who live along the river, they're river people, as we discussed when I was out there the other day. They see this happen all the time. This is not that. This is not what happened in January. This is much worse.
Forecasters predict the flooding will continue through the weekend. The Biden administration will make federally subsidized health care available to migrants brought to the U.S. as children, the so-called Dreamers. Under a directive announced today, some 100,000 are expected to enroll for coverage under the Affordable Care Act next year. Enrollment opens November 1st. And on Wall Street, stocks rose on hopes that slower job growth will prompt the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 450 points to close at 38,675. The Nasdaq rose 315 points, 2%. The S&P 500 added 63. Still to come on the NewsHour, a look at the terrorist threat posed by a resurgent ISIS in Syria. David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart weigh in on the week's headlines. And Vietnamese Americans along the Gulf Coast share tributes to home and community.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
One of former President Trump's most senior aides took the stand today during his hush money trial in New York. Hope Hicks served as Mr. Trump's press secretary during the 2016 campaign and was his White House communications director. On the stand, she detailed how Trump and his inner circle handled the revelations about alleged extramarital affairs and the payments made to bury those stories. Andrea Bernstein is covering the former president's legal battles for NPR and was in the courthouse today, and she joins us now. Andrea, so nice to see you.
Testifying at the criminal trial of her former boss.
Andrea Bernstein of NPR, thank you so much as always.
Thank you.
A landmark antitrust trial between the Department of Justice and Google is coming to an end, with both parties delivering closing arguments. As Stephanie Tsai explains, Google is accused of monopolizing the internet search market, sidelining competitors, and harming consumers.
William, the Justice Department claims that Google struck illegal deals with companies.
Thank you.
Today is World Press Freedom Day. The Committee to Protect Journalists says some 24 journalists have been killed so far this year, the vast majority of them dying in Gaza. All told, at least 97 journalists and media workers have been killed in Gaza, Israel, and Lebanon since the start of the war, making this by far the deadliest conflict for reporters in recent memory. So we wanted to give you a look at the life of our own journalist in Gaza, cameraman and producer Shams Odeh. He's been filming in Gaza since the October 7th terrorist attacks. Here's Nick Schifrin.
Gaza today is defined by destruction, death, and displacement. And Gaza producer and cameraman Shams Odeh has documented and experienced all three. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
It has been 5 years since the Islamic State, or ISIS, was defeated by a U.S.-led military campaign in Syria. But today, nearly 10,000 ISIS fighters remain jailed inside Syrian detention centers. Human rights groups call conditions in the prisons abusive, and local authorities warn that they are a breeding ground for radicalization and could help spark an ISIS revival. Special correspondent Layla Malana Allen traveled to northeast Syria to meet high-security prisoners and the regional forces that are still battling ISIS.
The horrors of ISIS, a threat long past the world believed.
Until it's either us or you guys.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Layla Malana Allen in Al Sinai Prison, northeast Syria.
As protests against the war in Gaza grew on college campuses this week, we also got the clearest vision yet for what former President Trump might do with a second term. That brings us to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That's New York Times columnists David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for The Washington Post. Gentlemen, so good to have you both here. David joining us from Chicago. Sorry to see you stuck in a television set over there. Jonathan, to you first. On these protests that we saw growing on across college campuses around the country, calls for divestment, some clashes, police being sent in, and some... David Brooks, Jonathan Capehart, always good to see you both. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
The 2 million Vietnamese Americans in this country often find their stories are still told through the lens of the Vietnam War, which ended almost 50 years ago. But as I learned on a recent trip to the Gulf Coast, a new generation is trying to tell a different story about their lives today. It's part of our arts and culture series, Canvas.
For artist Christian Dinh, almost everything he makes contains a tribute to home and to community. At the ore of is threaded through their work.
This afternoon, President Biden bestowed the nation's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Today's 19 different recipients hail from nearly all corners of American life, from actors to astronauts to activists like Opal Lee, known as the grandmother of Juneteenth, and to athletes like Katie Ledecky, the most decorated female swimmer. This afternoon, President Biden bestowed the nation's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Today's 19 different recipients hail from nearly all corners of American life, from actors to astronauts to activists like Opal Lee, known as the grandmother of Juneteenth, and to athletes like Katie Ledecky, the most decorated theme sport phenom and the first Native American to win an Olympic gold medal. This week, our digital show dives into the war in Gaza and how the ongoing conflict is playing out in the US as protests have grown across college campuses. You can find that on our YouTube channel. And be sure to tune in to Washington Week with The Atlantic tonight, where Jeffrey Goldberg and his panel examine President Biden's efforts to navigate the fallout of the Israel-Hamas war. And on PBS News Weekend, what the pullout of American troops from Chad and Niger could mean for security in the African region. Before we go, we want to say goodbye to a dear colleague who is leaving us today. Alexis Cox has been with the NewsHour for 24 years. She started as a production assistant, and with her sharp writing and gentle, unflappable spirit, soon became an essential part of our newsroom. She has helped shape our coverage of a quarter century of breaking news. She has been a mentor to many, a friend to all, and always a first-rate journalist. Alexis, on behalf of all of us at the NewsHour, thank you. We will miss you enormously. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm William Brangham. Thank you so much for joining us.
Many more years of success.
This is Asia Now.
It's 11 a.m. in Singapore and in Hong Kong. It's 8:30 in New Delhi and 10 o'clock in Jakarta.
I congratulate CNA and wish you many more years of success.
This is Asia Now.
It's 11 a.m. in Singapore and in Hong Kong. It's 8:30 in New Delhi and 10 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Teresa Tang. At this hour, Canadian police arrest 3 Indian nationals over the murder of Sikh activist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar last year. The case sparked a diplomatic spat between Canada and India after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau alleged Indian involvement in the killing. India denies the accusations. Hamas says it will send a delegation to Cairo later today to resume talks on a ceasefire in Gaza, though a top official accused Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu of trying to derail the proposed truce and hostage release deal. At least 39 people dead and dozens others missing as heavy rains batter southern Brazil. Officials say the death toll is likely to climb after the storm flooded streets and partially collapsed a dam. Tensions are simmering between India and Canada. 3 suspects have been arrested and charged over the slaying of a prominent Sikh activist in Vancouver last year. Canadian authorities are now investigating possible connections to the Indian government in the assassination that sparked a diplomatic row between the 2 countries.
3 suspects have been arrested and charged for...
Canadian police arrested and charged 3 Indian men on Friday in the murder of Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar and said they're probing whether the men have links to the Indian government. The 45-year-old was shot dead last June outside a temple in the western Canadian city of Surrey, which has a large Sikh population. A few months later, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau cited evidence of Indian government involvement, prompting a diplomatic crisis. New Delhi had rejected Trudeau's claim as absurd.
There are separate and distinct investigations ongoing into these matters, certainly not limited to the involvement of the people arrested today, and these efforts include investigating connections to the government of India.
He added, it's been difficult working with counterparts in India.
Collaboration is rather challenging and difficult for the last several years. However, the RCMP is very committed to continuing to establish a working relationship from a law enforcement to law enforcement agency, so we're going to continue our efforts, but it's been difficult.
Nijjar was a Canadian citizen campaigning for the creation of Khalistan, an independent Sikh homeland carved out of India. The presence of Sikh separatist groups in Canada has long frustrated New Delhi, which had labeled Nijjar a terrorist. Police said they had tremendous support from the broader community to investigate what they described as an outrageous and reprehensible murder. The men charged with it include 2 22-year-olds, Kamalpreet Singh and Garn Brar, and 28-year-old Garnpreet Singh.
Currently, we believe that there may be others involved, and therefore there may be potential arrests or charges for others as well.
Last week, the White House expressed concern about the reported role of the Indian intelligence service in assassination plots in Canada and the United States. Last November, U.S. authorities said an Indian government official had directed the plot in the attempted murder of another Sikh separatist. The Indian mission in Ottawa did not respond to requests for comment.
A top Hamas official has accused Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of trying to derail a proposed truce in Gaza. The Hamas official said Mr. Netanyahu's insistence on attacking Rafah was calculated to thwart any possibility of concluding an agreement. Foreign mediators have been waiting for Hamas to a proposal to halt the fighting for 40 days. The truce would also see the exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners. Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh has said the group was considering it in a positive spirit. The militant group is sending a delegation back to Cairo to resume talks on the issue. But a major stumbling block now is that while Hamas has demanded a lasting ceasefire, Mr. Netanyahu has vowed to completely eradicate the group. The Israeli leader claims Hamas's remaining fighters are hiding in Rafah. The U.S., though, says it has not seen a comprehensive plan for Israel's potential military operation in Rafah.
We've expressed our concerns with a major ground invasion in Rafah. We've been very clear about that, which would have significant risk against civilian casualties, and outlined an alternative course of action. We have done that for them, outlined an alternative course of action for Israel to dismantle Hamas.
Global aid agencies are concerned an offensive into Rafah would have devastating impacts on the 1.2 million Gazans in the city. The World Health Organization chief, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, said the agency was deeply concerned that a full-scale military operation in Rafah could lead to a bloodbath.
So we are looking at, if this happens, both what the Emergency Relief Coordinator has warned about could be a slaughter of civilians, but also at the same time, an incredible blow to the humanitarian operation in the entire Strip, because it is run primarily out of Rafah.
Pro-Palestinian protests that have swept across U.S. campuses for weeks have waned in some colleges after a crackdown on the demonstrations. More than 2,100 people have been arrested since the 18th of April, the day after the first encampment was set up at New York's Columbia University. Universities in the U.S. are now bracing themselves for disruptions with looming year-end exams and commencements. 4 schools have graduation events scheduled this weekend, and many others have ceremonies lined up throughout this month and the next. Schools say they are working to enhance security, while protesters consider staging walkouts and other possible action. Meanwhile, similar student-led demonstrations have taken root in cities around the world, including in Berlin and in Paris.
Il y a quelques années, on n'aurait jamais envoyé la police au sein d'une université pour une occupation. C'est aussi un choix des étudiants d'occuper aussi pour faire entendre notre voix. Aujourd'hui, on a période de partiel, on est quand même là, on est mobilisés, donc je pense qu'il y a une volonté de notre part aussi de prendre sur notre temps personnel pour s'engager et pour soutenir notre cause.
Record-breaking floods in southern Brazil have killed at least 39 people. Officials warned that the death toll is expected to rise, as dozens are still left unaccounted for. The torrential rains began battering the state of Rio Grande do Sul on Monday. Floods partially collapsed a dam in the city, triggering mudslides and turning entire streets into rivers. The state's governor has called the event the worst disaster in its history. Entire communities are without access to electricity. Authorities have warned that a second dam is in danger of collapsing and urged residents to evacuate. Around 17,000 people have already been forced from their homes.
Tá tudo perdido. Tudo. Não tem nada inteiro, nada. Tô 23 anos aqui trabalhando no meu postinho.
Eu tenho 53 anos. É a primeira vez que vai entrar água na nossa casa. Nunca entrou, nós nunca pensamos que a gente ia passar por isso. É muita água. Muita água.
Brazil's president has pledged that there would be no lack of human or material resources to help the affected state deal with the floods. Water levels are at 150-year highs, according to the Brazilian Geological Service, due to rains linked to the El Niño weather event. Authorities declared a state of emergency on Thursday. Stay with us. Ahead on Asia Now, how a recent Delhi terror attack near Moscow is prompting a relook of Russia's policy on migrant workers. And the struggles of a lawyer from Burundi, one of 15,000 refugees hosted by Hong Kong.
This is a dupe of Jacquemus again. I got this for $5.
Dupes. Again on France 24.
Hamas is to send a delegation back to Cairo this Saturday to resume Gaza ceasefire talks. It says with a positive spirit, and it comes amid reports Israel is soon to begin removing civilians from the southern city of Rafah ahead of a ground invasion. In the US, a dozen pro-Palestinian demonstrators are arrested at encampments at New York University, the latest in weeks of protest against the war in Gaza. More than 2,300 have been detained across US campuses, protests also spreading across the world. And China launches its most complex robotic lunar mission to date, the Chang'e 6 blasting off from Hainan Island, hoping to bring back samples from the far side of the moon. That would certainly be a giant leap forward for Beijing's ambitious space program. Good evening to whoever you're watching. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. First up, Hamas says it's sending a delegation back to Cairo this Saturday to resume Gaza ceasefire talks. The Palestinian militant group said it was examining Israel's latest proposal for a temporary truce and hostage swap with a positive spirit. France 24's Shirley Sitbon has this update.
This is the situation in Gaza as Hamas returns to the negotiation table. Among the latest destructions, these buildings in Rafah, the southern city, pounded again.
This is supposedly the safe area in Rafah. We were displaced and came to it. It is nonsense. All areas are the same. There are civilians and children dying.
In the deal currently discussed, bombardments and fighting could be halted for several weeks. Hamas wants to push it further, demanding that the long, multi-phased process would end with Israeli forces pulling out of Gaza. That's the main sticking point. Israel's government still wants to destroy what it calls Hamas's last battalions to avoid new attacks once Israeli troops leave the ground. The fact Hamas is sending negotiators to Egypt and that Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the political wing of the group, describes their spirit as positive is seen as an encouraging sign. A hope that Israeli hostage families are clinging onto, as perhaps the last chance to see their loved ones come home alive. For Drol's family, that hope was dashed as authorities said the 49-year-old was killed on October 7th, like his wife. 2 of their children were taken hostage and released by Hamas in November. 133 hostages are still held by Hamas. Many are believed to be dead. Their families are pleading that they all be released.
Well, as we heard from Shirley Sitbon there, a major stumbling block to Gaza's truce is Israel's repeated promises of that ground invasion of Rafah. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists the only way to defeat Hamas is to go into the southern city, despite international alarm over the safety of more than 1 million Palestinians sheltering there. The UN says an incursion would be a bloodbath. Israel's top ally, the US, has urged extreme caution. Fraser Jackson has more from Washington.
There was some reporting here in the US earlier in the day that the Israelis had shown a preliminary plan to the US about an operation in Rafah. Well, I can now say that I've had that confirmed to me as well by a source familiar that the US has indeed seen its preliminary plan from the Israeli government, but stressed that this was not a finalized plan as well. Now, this media report, originally came from Politico. That media report, citing US officials, said that up to 1.5 million people who are currently in Rafah were about to be moved to Al-Wawasi, which is about 7 kilometers away from Rafah, further onto the coast there of the Gaza Strip. It is a small strip of land, but the Politico report said that the Israeli army had shown these plans to aid groups in the area and to the US government as well. That's part of the reporting. I cannot say that I've confirmed to me personally, but they say that that is what their plan was, to move them to the further to the west, to that strip of land. Now, the Politico report goes on to say that the US officials asked were not aware of any imminent plans for this to happen, and said that they were waiting on further details from the Israelis on how this would actually get put in place. But Israeli sources also told Politico that the plan would happen, quote, soon, but didn't give a time frame for that. Now, my source said to me that the US remains engaged with Israel regarding the Rafah operation, and says that basically the US position hasn't changed, that nothing should go ahead until there is a concrete plan on how to safeguard the lives of those up to 1.5 million civilians that are currently taking refuge in Rafah.
The World Food Programme says northern Gaza is now in full-blown famine after nearly 7 months of war. Cindy McCain, the US director of the UN body, said civilians in the north of the Strip had gone over the brink, and said the horror, as she put it, was now moving south. Israel has recently begun allowing in more food and other humanitarian aid. The UN's Palestinian relief agency UNRWA says supplies have improved, but it was still nowhere near enough to reverse the trend of famine. In the US, around a dozen pro-Palestinian demonstrators have been arrested after refusing to leave their encampments at New York University. It's the latest in weeks of protest against Israel's war in Gaza. Clashes between students and police were less intense on Friday. The unrest peaked this week when police moved in to arrest students at Columbia University in Upper Manhattan. More than 2,300 people have now been arrested across US campuses. More from Sophie Lamont.
Dozens of students handcuffed, taken into police custody. On Friday, police forces conducted raids in 2 university campuses, dismantling pro-Palestinian protests and arresting demonstrators.
Good operation. No one got hurt. No incidents. Both institutions are happy. We're happy, and we're moving on.
In just 2 weeks, 2,000 students have already been apprehended across the country. These young activists are demanding an end to American military aid to Israel, an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and a severing of ties between their university and the Hebrew state. From New York to Seattle, the movement is spreading like wildfire through the country. And both sides of the argument are resorting to the same tactics. In Indiana, pro-Israeli students are occupying the university grounds. They're denouncing a rise in anti-Semitism and hate speech.
Anti-Semitism tends to spike anytime Israel comes up in the news. And I have seen some really disturbing and awful and hateful things being said across the nation at very nice universities and institutions.
These student movements echoed across the world question the US's unconditional support to Israel, an issue that could be a decisive one in Joe Biden's re-election campaign.
In other world news, Russia has called statements by France and Britain about the war in Ukraine dangerous. Emmanuel Macron said this week that he would not rule out sending French troops to Ukraine. That's repeating earlier comments, while UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron said Kiev will be able to use British long-range weapons to strike inside Russia if Russia tells us more.
The UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron continued a visit to Ukraine, planting a tree with the mayor of Lviv in the west of the country. The UK during the visit has announced around €3.5 billion in annual military aid. Attention is focused on Cameron's statement in Kyiv on Thursday, saying Ukraine could use British weapons against targets inside Russia.
Ukraine has that right, just as Russia is striking inside Ukraine. You can quite understand why Ukraine feels the need to make sure it's defending itself, it's getting the Russians out of its country, and it has the ability to strike back.
In Moscow, Cameron's statement, along with one by the French president repeating he doesn't exclude sending troops to Ukraine, was described as dangerous by Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov.
This is a direct escalation of tension around the Ukrainian conflict, which could potentially pose a danger to European security. We note this dangerous tendency to escalate tension in official statements.
Emmanuel Macron was asked in this week's edition of The Economist, do you stand by what you said about possibly sending ground troops to Ukraine? And the French president replied, absolutely. As I said, I'm not ruling anything out, because we are facing someone who is not ruling anything out. In terms of diplomacy, Macron will next week make a new push to try and dissuade the Chinese President Xi Jinping from supporting Putin's war against Ukraine. Russia, in another statement on Friday, said it was ready to consider serious proposals to settle the Ukraine conflict based on what it said were existing realities. The conditions made were no different to ones Ukraine has rejected several times in the past.
Next up, if you've ever had to deal with crowds posing for tourist shots and selfies around you, you'll find this one interesting. The small town of Fuji-Kawaguchiko is home to one of Japan's most famous sites, Mount Fuji. But locals have complained of photo-hungry visitors ignoring red lights, littering, smoking and parking illegally, to mention just a few. So, officials are building a wall to block the view. Take a look.
Mount Fuji, an emblematic symbol of Japan and major tourist attraction. This viewpoint, where the majestic and active volcano appears behind the Lawson convenience store, is particularly popular. But soon, it won't be possible to catch a snap of the snowy peak from here. In this small town, authorities, exacerbated by crowds of badly behaved foreign tourists, are installing barriers and nets to block the view of Mount Fuji.
So I can see why people who live and work here, why they might want to do something about that, just to deter tourists a little bit. I noticed today that Mount Fuji's not even in the view, and people are still taking pictures.
Probably not the best solution. One solution, certainly, but not the best one.
They're overcrowding the nearby cities, but also the hills of the iconic mountain. More than 200,000 visitors hiked up last year. Day or night, the mountain is constantly busy, and for local authorities, this could even lead to safety hazards.
If lots of people gather up there, it could get very overcrowded.
People could fall and might get seriously hurt. It's very worrying.
3 million people visited the country in March alone this year. In Kyoto, locals have complained of snap-happy tourists harassing the city's immaculately dressed geishas. Guards are now roaming the streets and are even considering closing down some parts of the city to foreigners, measures that could hurt local businesses.
Our income comes from foreign tourists, and if there aren't as many foreigners, our revenue could drop.
In a bid to fight overcrowding, Japan is now introducing a tax on tourism to Mount Fuji.
The Japanese town of Fuji Kawaguchi got sick of photo-hungry visitors overrunning the place. Finally, one last story. China has launched its most complex robotic lunar mission, and it's potentially historic. The Chang'e 6 probe blasted off on Friday from Hainan Island. It hopes to bring back samples from the far side of the moon for the first time ever. Needless to say, it would be a giant leap forward for Beijing's ambitious space program. Jenny Shen tells us more.
With a mighty roar, the Chang'e 6 spacecraft blasts off from the Wenchang space launch site, embarking on its journey to the far side of the moon.
The Chang'e 6 probe has accurately entered the preset orbit. The spacecraft's solar panels are unfolded and functioning normally. I hereby announce that this launch mission is a complete success.
The Chang'e 6 spacecraft took off at 5:27 local time, separating from the rocket and entering its Earth-Moon transfer orbit approximately 37 minutes after liftoff. Within 48 hours of landing, a robotic arm will collect rocks, soil, and other samples from the far side of the lunar surface, with scientific detection work to be carried out simultaneously. The ascender will then take the samples and carry them back to Earth, landing in North China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. Any samples retrieved by the lander could provide crucial data to help scientists better understand the evolution of the moon and the solar system itself. It's a flight that's expected to last about 53 days, and a key milestone for China's lunar ambitions to become a dominant space power. The country plans to land astronauts on the moon by the year 2030 and build a research base on its south pole.
And that's about it from us for now here on the France 24 Night Watch. Thanks for staying with us, and see you next time.
Hello and welcome, I'm Clarisse Fortuné and you're watching Eye on Africa, our top stories. Schools will stay closed until further notice in Kenya as heavy rains that killed hundreds of people continue, and the worst may be yet to come. As the world marks Press Freedom Day, Reporters Without Borders says the biggest threats facing journalists are political authorities, including on the continent. And the Nigerian film industry on the French red carpet. The Nollywood Week Film Festival is back in Paris. This year is all about the best of African storytelling and cutting-edge technology. Heavy rains and floods continue the path of destruction across Kenya, homes, bridges, and other infrastructure, but also a heavy toll, more than 200.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Goodman. Have a good life.